In England, a king hath little more to do than make war and give away places, which, in plain terms, is to impoverish the nation and set it together by the ears. A pretty business indeed for a man to be allowed £800,000 sterling a year for, and worshipped into the bargain. Of more worth is one honest man to society, and in the sight of God, than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived.
Common sense is a commodity that sorely lacks in our present society. Like those that came before it, and surely it'll be an affliction that plagues us in all following generations as well, unfortunately. Common Sense is also the title of the 47-page pamphlet published on January 10th of 1776. That'd be just right around the start of the American Revolution, and it makes a rather persuasive, although, yes, very impassioned case for American independence from the British Empire. In plain English, I would call it incendiary. As soon as it was released to the general public, it was regarded in the colonies widely as a sensation, with it having the largest sale and circulation of any other written work in American history, proportional to the population of the time. The zeal for common sense was such that it even required a second printing. However, the author of the popular pamphlet himself profited very little from his work. In fact, Thomas Paine was not associated with his work at the time, not until much later. Rather, his work was published in Philadelphia anonymously, authored simply as by an Englishman. Why publish such a work anonymously, though? At face, it would seem that one would have everything to gain from the publication of such a work, except we are forgetting that this pamphlet was as seditious in nature as it was popular at the time. It was essentially a based attack upon the monarchy that it was published under, and hence an attack on the king. Common Sense effectively rested all resentments of the colonists firmly atop His Majesty's shoulders, claiming such an institution as both absurd and tyrannical. It was such a clear-cut initiative to inspire resentment towards the crown. Whatever could go wrong, honestly.
Open his head!
And whereas there is reason to apprehend that such rebellion hath been much promoted and encouraged by the traitorous correspondence, counsels, and comfort of divers wicked and desperate persons within this realm, we have thought fit to issue our royal proclamation hereby declaring that not only all our officers, civil and military, are obliged to exert their utmost endeavors to suppress such rebellion and to bring the traitors to justice.
Acceptable justice for treacherous correspondence being, of course, nothing short of death, and all because of some passionate prose in a pamphlet. Prose that, of course, helped to incense the common colonial man to take up arms against the crown and revolt. But prose, nonetheless. New column. Racist abuse targeted at England football stars exposes social media's biggest failing. It's time tech firms ban all anonymous accounts and insist on ID so we can see how brave these bigoted scumbags feel when they're made accountable. Absolutely. It's ridiculous that I now have almost 12,000 accounts blocked, nearly all of them anonymous. Requiring official ID would wipe out most trolls overnight. Not all anon accounts are used for bile or trolling. Some people have to protect their identities and lives from others. Sorry, trolling is top priority, I'm afraid. Literally killing people. If you're worried about being identified, don't go on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Such a based take, because frankly it is a little bit detached, especially now, considering what it is we're going to talk about today. We're here to defend people's rights to remain anonymous online, if you hadn't figured that out already. I thought I'd throw in my hat into the ring of discourse to discuss a topic near and dear to my heart, but more thoroughly than others have addressed it, I feel. Because I don't think people quite understand just exactly what's at stake here, It's quite a bit, quite a number of things. I don't think it's crazy to suggest that everyone uses social media, and that to suggest that those people that wish to remain anonymous on social media just deal with not using it is kind of ridiculous. Extremely ridiculous, in fact. The very idea boggles the mind. At least mine. I don't know about you. So in order to defend anonymity online, I think we're going to have to start off with the petition to ban anonymity on the internet and social media sites itself. The one that kind of was going around a little bit earlier last month, that got super popular, or infamous, depending on what side you fall. The discourse. It goes like this. Make verified ID a requirement for opening a social media account. Make it a legal requirement when opening a new social media account to provide a verified form of ID. Where the account belongs to a person under the age of 18, verify the account with the ID of a parent/guardian to prevent anonymized harmful activity, providing traceability if an offense occurs. My son Harvey is disabled. He is also the kind and gentle son of a person regularly in the public eye. The Online Harms Bill doesn't go far enough in making online abuse a specific criminal offense and doing what Harvey's law intended. To make the law work needs the removal of anonymity to ensure that users cannot cause harm by using online platforms to abuse others. Where an offense has taken place, they ought to be easily identified and reported to the police and punished. We've experienced the worst kind of abuse towards my disabled son and want to make sure that no one can hide behind their crime. So this is the proposition that we're dealing with, essentially, and to make it a requirement to have an ID upon initiation of a social media account in order to validate that this is an actual person tied to this account. Not a bot. This would certainly curb bot efforts, obviously, but it would also help to deter, I don't know what they're called now, but they used to be called eggs, when Twitter still used eggs as the default icon. It's been a while since I've seen an egg. You would remove the attractiveness of being able to just boot up account after account after account after sock account in order to fulfill your nefarious goals. That is the heart of this argument. Because we all know, or we've all been there, where we're dealing with someone on the internet that is just there to troll. Which, again, it's fine. Alright, cool, whatever. They're just there to get a rise out of people, obviously. And they do it very well sometimes. But to initiate legislation or open up a debate on legislation to address this seems overreactive. And there was very little forethought put into the idea itself and the consequences of what enacting this specific legislation would do. That's what we're here to do, is to kind of broaden the perception of the consequences for this specific legislation if it were to pass. So the person who posted this petition, her name is Katie Price. I'm not too familiar with her or her family or her work online, but she also wrote an article that paired with this petition where she essentially promoted it, and we're going to go over that as well because I do feel like it goes a little bit deeper into her mentality. I won't stop until those who bully people like Harvey are held to account. I have lived with trolls my entire professional life. I don't want that for my children or my children's children. So the article summarized much of what was already in the petition, discussing her son Harvey, a heavily disabled 18-year-old who has suffered abuse by anonymous trolls online because of his many disabilities, apparently, and race, and that it is heartbreaking for a mother to watch. So we are approaching this from a very emotional, caregiving state of mind. So probably not all that rational, which I understand is part of the reason why maybe there was a lack of foresight in this petition. It is Katie's opinion that the Online Harms Bill doesn't go far enough, as stated in the original petition, in protecting the vulnerable from online harassment. And so, to that, we have a brief aside. It effectively sets aside strict guidelines dictating the removal of such illegal content as child sex abuse, terrorist material, and media promoting suicide or risk being blocked in the UK. Further, it requires these companies to abide by a code of conduct that sets out responsibilities towards children and requires these sites to set their terms and conditions, to be subject to fines on negligence of these terms and conditions. And lastly, it gives Ofcom the power to levy fines of up to 18 million or 10% of the global turnover of the website, whichever happens to be higher. And that was for those of you who, like myself, knew nothing about the context which Katie neglected to offer in her article regarding the online harms bill. Anyway, given no other option, Katie has concluded that the only way to ensure the safety of her poor, unfortunate criticism shield, child, Harvey, is to revoke a person's right to anonymity on the internet. That such parties be identified, reported to the authorities, and punished profusely. I'm calling for it to be made a legal requirement when opening a social media account to provide a verified form of ID. Where the account belongs to a person under the age of 18, I want big tech companies like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to ask for the account to be verified with the ID of a parent or guardian to prevent anonymized, harmful activity and to allow the offender to be tracked and traced. Although this is very obviously for the sake of a personal vendetta against an anon troll who likely once called her a dim-witted ninny-head once upon a time, Katie also assures us that this law is, in fact, for the public good. Believe it or not. For the sake of kindness, people, we shan't let hate and abuse prevail. But also, and more importantly, her son is being attacked by Twitter egg, meanie poo-poo heads on the internet. So, that takes precedence over literally anything else. Lives are at stake, but mainly her son's feelings. A reading from the Book of Receipts, chapter Scooby, verses 2 through 3. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Weebo, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Scooby, and Scooby went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and spoke with them, saying, "What happens to this little slut is going to be your fault. I want you to know that. Send that to that slut, Weebo, and that cock 6. I'm nailing her to the wall tomorrow now. I need screenshots of that chat too, if you could. He should never have phoned in demands on our last stream about anti-hero." A reading from the Book of Receipts, chapter Sedocris, verse 21. And while she was being accused by the chief priests and elders, she answered nothing. Then Sedocris said to her, "I at least know no one likes me. How are you going, Weebo Jones? Need a hand, Rolf?" I had first name and last name, plus street address of Weebo Jones. "I will hunt you down, human. I could dox Weebo Jones if I wanted to. If you are friends with Weebo Jones, just fuck off." But she answered him not once a word, so that the Sadochrist marveled greatly. And that's not even the worst of it. I've made a few enemies in my time as a YouTuber simply for speaking my mind and my opinion, for cracking jokes, for making, I thought, valid points. Some of them admittedly a bit off color, but nothing, certainly nothing, worthy of being hunted down and thrown to the gulags over. So I think. Others, it's apparent, feel differently about the subject. I guess. You decide. And honestly, my opinions aren't even that controversial. They're milquetoast, dirty, centrist, hippie, middling of the road. Can't we all get along in dalliance in a field of daisies type nonsense? I think the only extremist opinion I hold is on children and how children of all forms, shapes, and sizes should be banned from the internet until the age of 18. And I am 100% right about that. 100%. But having my online persona, which is just me, and my real-life identity, which is again just, hi, me, disconnected from each other, has been, for the past 5 years or so, my first line of defense against lunatics who want to ruin my life, or strangle me, or cannibalize me, That one happened once. Or take erotic photos of me. Or violate me. Opening up that door to those kind of people, allowing people to know who others are as simply as phone books did in the past. Well, I don't think it's a good idea. If you, in fact, mandate that people's identities are tied to their online personas, you fast track a whole hell of a lot of people retaliating against people who use online spaces to exist unabashedly, trolling or otherwise. And if your counter argument is, well, social media sites won't release this data to the wider public, or it'll be kept under server lock and key, that's laughable to me. You're being willfully dense, or you straight up live in a bubble. In August of 2015, I'm sure people remember this, but Impact Team infiltrated AshleyMadison.com, which was a dating service catering to married or persons in relationships seeking an affair, leaking the personal details of its user base, including names, email addresses, credit card information, and sexual fantasies. 30 million Ashley Madison users quickly found themselves in the doghouse as 25 gigabytes of data was released to the internet. Why do we have 30 million people willing to cheat on their spouses and significant others? That's just depressing. Oh my god. It quickly gave rise to search pages offering easy lookup options for people's information, and those who'd been exposed sank into depression and anxiety as their home lives proceeded to fall apart after being exposed for their adulterous, debaucherous ways. Supposedly, at least 2 suicides can be directly linked to the data breach. And that's just my first example. Just last week, August 24th, 2021, the current year, our society saw 38 million records get leaked to the World Wide Web for months by major companies, state and federal agencies. American Airlines, Maryland Health Department, and New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority exposed 38 million people's names, social security numbers, phone numbers, dates of birth, demographic information, addresses, and even dates of employer drug tests and union membership data. All because someone misconfigured a setting. This wasn't even a malicious release of data of its user base. This was just pure accident. Shall I continue? I think I will. T-Mobile. That's my cellular provider. Honey! So T-Mobile confirmed that it was the subject of a massive data breach that exposed the personal information of at least 50 million people. The information leaked included first and last names, birth dates, social security numbers, and driver's license information. That was August 17th of this year. Do you get my point yet? Data can be compromised, and it is so easy to compromise. Just because you, Katie, make assurances that Twitter won't knowingly let some rando with a vendetta take a peeksies at my handle associated user information doesn't mean that I am naive enough to not think that this is a horrible idea on several fronts. On to the Jimothy analogy. Guys, it's so bad. It's such a bad idea. I cannot express enough how horrendous of an idea that this is. What's interesting is that the thought of mind-sworn enemies online or some identity fraudster was not even on this woman's radar of things wrong with this idea. Wasn't even Katie's chief concern when she birthed this brainchild into the void of the internet as far as dissent goes. Simply put, the only concern that she actually addressed was that this could out vulnerable people online, such as domestic abuse victims or teenagers seeking support anonymously for being LGBTQ+. Which, okay, valid. Except, she says, it's fine. No one's being outed or required to provide personal info. No personal info whatsoever. We're just making it a legal requirement for when opening a new social media account to provide a verified form of ID. Which likely perhaps includes such things as a driver's license, which, has things like your full legal name on it, your date of birth, your address, donor status, height, weight, hair color, eye color, and sex. For crying out loud. Lady, did you proofread your own petition? It's plain as day. Here in black and white. I cannot make it clearer. Regardless, you're still sending the gelato over to the Jimothy's house for disturbing the online peace and kindness you tried so desperately to cultivate. Semantics aside, Katie Price says no one's getting outed, but what if? I don't endorse this because remember, I am vehemently against children on the internet. But what if little Jimothy has just a touch of the gay, a touch, and wishes to explore that community, to be included, and feelings about his sexuality in these reserved spaces online, free of his father's homophobic eye. Perhaps Jimothy is looking for like-minded people in that respect. Well, sorry, can't, because little Jimothy, 13-year-old that he is, needs the consent of his parents and or guardian in order to verify, since he is under the age of 18. So, what can Jimothy do? Well, little Jimothy can either out himself to his abusive father, who believes homosexuality is a sin that can be cured via electroconvulsive shock therapy, or he can just suffer in silence and suck it up, buttercup. Straight back into the closet with you, little Jimothy. Don't you come out until you're 18 years of age. It's okay. You're not missing out on much. That place has pedophiles and Twitch thoughts that fart into their microphones and furries. Anyway, hope you enjoy that crippling self-loathing that manifests as a result of your suppressed sexuality. Enjoy the crippling anxiety, and remember, we cross the street for attention, we walk down it for results. Wow, we're getting super spicy with the takes today, aren't we, Weebo? Yes, we are. And I haven't even gotten to the juiciest parts yet, which, are juicy only simply because, No, don't say it! Don't say it! You know, what I love about this hilariously bad idea that Katie has had, the fact that the UK government itself has responded to this petition with the following. The online safety legislation will address anonymous harmful activity. User ID verification for social media could disproportionately impact vulnerable users and interfere with the freedom of expression. Vulnerable users and interfere with freedom of expression. Well, who on earth could we be talking about? We already covered little Jimothy, who's going to grow up to be either a self-hating closeted gay man married to a woman named Evangeline, have 2 kids, and one day leave everything he's ever known to live out the rest of his life as a transient gay hooker. Or simply not grow up at all. Really, it is a coin toss how that hypothetical goes, honestly. Whomsoever could the UK government of all people be referring to then? Those little scamps preaching about freedom of expression when I have this little handy article from The Times, circa 2017, hiding in my back pocket. Best apologize to those 3,395 people arrested in 2016 for a violation of the Communications Act of 2003, which makes it illegal to intentionally cause annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety to another. As if I needed more proof that the American Revolution was the right move. And we've come full circle, because I began this video with an introduction quote from the anonymous writer Thomas Paine, absolutely dunking on King George III to establish just how important the concept of anonymity has been historically. And now I will move on to how it is important currently and will be in the coming times. So let's dive in. Let me tell you, nothing grinds my giblets more than a blatant disregard of reality when trying to craft legislation that could affect us all. Because let's be real, Twitter is not going to geo-limit the extent of their ID verification to just UK users should this petition achieve what it set out to do. No, I'm sorry. That seems like it would be ridiculous. If they roll out this feature, everyone is getting slapped in the face with it. Everywhere these apps are used. And ironically, Katie will have achieved her goal. Or maybe not so ironically. Because remember, unintentional collateral aside, the heart of Katie's desire here is to name and shame trolls by dick-slapping them in the face with the baton of the state. And boy howdy, would the state just love to indulge in the sweet, sweet nectar of these juicy pomegranates. I mean, how could they resist? They haven't before, honestly. If there exists a repository of data which can help to identify offenders of the state, no matter how justified their cause might be, it would be judicially negligent to not even attempt to be granted unmitigated access to those repositories. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. They have come for your DNA in the pursuit of justice, to solve murders and rapes. Okay, good, you say. If my genetic code is the price that I pay to be able to put away a murderer, then so be it. Okay, sure, fine, dandy. Let's continue. They have come for your personal electronic devices, either attempting to listen in on your private communications or in attempting to break into your secure devices. Okay, that's fine. It's cool. Not a big deal. I don't need that lock-in key number thing that prevents people from getting into my phone and accessing all of my bank details, nudie leaks, and such. It's fine. It's not a big deal. And they have done this in the service of fighting terroristic threats, with a side hustle of subpoenaing reporters for their interview notes in pursuit of nasty, bad, meanie hacker people. And while the gullible everyday man goes about his life in his business suit like it's just another day, to set a precedent that gives the state license to weasel its way into your private life, communication, genetic code, and information without prejudice most certainly has its drawbacks. But while you, an average citizen, may think you're doing nothing legally wrong, can you say for absolute certainty that that will always be the case? I'm reminded of a quote. It's a relevant one, and is most famously associated with the Nazi German minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Like I said, it's most famously associated with him, but I don't think he actually coined the term. I believe that's a myth. Regardless, it's a thing people say. And whether or not that's true, let's humor the people who harbor this sentiment that you should have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. It's a very self-absorbed notion. The idea that, oh, just because you have never done anything wrong in your life means that you should be good. You should be fine with just laying it all out there, bare, naked, abreast, for the rest of the world to gawk at. Like it's not a big deal. But to some people, it is a big deal. Bisexual Afghan, stuck under Taliban rule, fears he'll be executed, but hasn't lost hope. Basir, whose name has been withheld to protect his identity, told Pink News that he is stuck in Afghanistan, where he now fears he will be killed if his sexuality is exposed. You should have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. Are we still on board with that sentiment? Afghan women fear for their jobs and daughters' futures. From female journalists wiping computer files to beauticians removing posters from salons, many Afghan women are taking no chances with country's new Taliban leaders, despite promises they can keep working. 3 days after the Islamic movement's shock seizure of Kabul, there were few women on the streets. Some women were deleting their social media accounts, while others were closing businesses and donning burqas to avoid being identified when outdoors. I feel like a prisoner. I daren't step outside my home, said one award-winning journalist whose name has been withheld for her safety. You should have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. Whose name has been withheld for her safety. Now, that's not the only time that phrase has ever come up in the history of journalism, ever. In fact, it's quite a popular phrase, or something along those lines, that gets utilized again and again and again and again. And that's because telling the truth has danger to it. Because some people do not want to hear the truth, do not want the truth spoken aloud. So when you say you should have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide, do we still want to leave that door wide open? That one. We're being treated like slaves, factory workers stuck in year-long lockdown. Nadia has barely left the Dugango Cimitos cement plant in southern Mozambique in more than a year. At the plant, she has been working like a slave, she said. Nadia, whose name has been changed to protect her from retribution, hasn't seen her family in a very long time. Since the beginning of 2020, she has seen her children mainly through the plant's gates. An investigation by Vice World News found that, along with some other 300 other workers, Nadia had been virtually held captive at the plant since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. You should have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. How about when you're being held against your will and kept from your families and forced to work? Have I gotten through to the people in the back yet? No? Okay, here's some more. Interpreter in hiding. Afghans who serve the US forces expect death. They're going to slaughter us. In his basement in Kandahar Monday night, the former interpreter for the US military sits quietly with his wife and 5 children, the youngest 2 years old, hiding from the Taliban patrolling the streets outside. 4 days earlier, as militants took over his home city, he burned an American flag he had been saving, along with a certificate of appreciation he received for his service, signed by 2 U.S. Army officers. If the Taliban had found those things, he said, they would kill me immediately. Your professionalism, untiring efforts, and outstanding support have directly contributed to mission success. Read the 2013 certificate. Now, just ashes. As the Taliban exerted its control over Afghanistan's capital Monday, the interpreter said he felt that his death was more certain than ever. They're going to slaughter us, he said in a voice note recorded for Spectrum News, the sound of his children's voices echoing off the basement walls behind him. He only thought of the next 24 hours ahead, and he only planned to leave the basement to shower or go to the bathroom, or to buy food as quickly as possible. On the spot, they're going to kill us, he said, adding, they're not human, they're like animals. The interpreter, who's asked to remain anonymous because he fears for his life, is one of the thousands who are now hiding in their houses, some in basements, terrified they will face retribution for their work. I don't have to go back very far, much less to the Holocaust, to give you examples of the majority power holder of a country simply salivating at the thought of someone who had helped their enemies, or who had the wrong sexual identity, or who said the wrong thing, and having their identity outed to an entity that revels in eliminating those problems with extreme prejudice. I don't have to look very hard to know that anonymity, on any sort of level, keeps people alive. You know, and I know for a fact, that given a repository of Afghanistan-based Twitter users and their corresponding real-life identities, the online parties that did not align squarely with the Taliban's ideals would have been singled out and executed. And even the ones that maybe marginally deviated from those ideas. But maybe you personally don't live in Afghanistan, and you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. Remember, though, whatever legal mandates are leveraged against a tech entity will likely be adopted on a global scale. Meaning, you might not be condemning yourself to deal with the Taliban persecution, but even Batuta over in Kabul will most certainly not have that same luxury. Of course, you'll likely still have to contend with the host of other possibilities that I outlined in this video. And based on that, you will have to make a decision. You'll have to decide which you value more, your privacy or your safety from online trolls. You should have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. What an entirely selfish, self-absorbed method of justifying such bull fucking shit.